like to take you on a little bit of a journey today. One that began 17 years ago in this very church. You might notice on the front of your bulletins today is a picture of our old confirmation class. Well, this confirmation class, which I was a part of, left here on a mission trip to Harlan, Kentucky. And while there, we were tasked with serving food at a homeless shelter, building a house, and painting homes. I don't remember being briefed on the people who lived in this part of the country, known as Appalachia, but I had my assumptions based on what I'd seen on TV and in the movies. I remember watching scenes that depicted racist, backwoods hillbillies living in utter poverty. Think of some of the characters you might have seen on shows like The Dukes of Hazzard or The Beverly Hillbillies. As we made our way toward Kentucky, I reminded myself that these were the people we were going to help, and that with assistance from our group and others, they would finally have a shot at a better life. So what changed between the time our van left for Kentucky and the time it returned to this parking lot? What changed in Kentucky, in Appalachia? I know, at least as far as for us, our group was a bit more tired than when we left, perhaps a bit smellier than when we left. Certainly the chaperones were tired. And we all felt better about ourselves because we'd spent a week helping other people. But what did we learn about the Appalachian people, about the stories we had already been told coming into this excursion? My idea of life in Appalachia and the people who lived there were pretty much, for the most part, unchanged. I wonder, though, if things would have turned out differently had we asked them one simple question. What is it like to be you in this place? What is it like to be you in this place? Can I hear you guys ask that question?
What is it like to be you in this place?
It's a simple question, but it's pretty profound when you really think about it. I learned to ask that question the second time I went to Harlan, Kentucky, just last month. I traveled back to Appalachia with a group from my seminary. And because we asked that question of the people we met, the person I was coming out of the trip was very different than the person I was going into it. On day one, as our bus drove through Whitesburg, Kentucky, I noticed a sign above a shop entrance that said, "Come see yourself." The sign meant, come see what they had to offer. But I initially read it as, "Come, see yourself." And I wondered how I could really see myself in the people of Appalachia. I mean, let's be honest, the locals here wouldn't know the first thing about me or my life back in Connecticut. How could I possibly expect to see myself here? But I hadn't asked that important question yet. What is it like
To be you in this place.
as we pulled up to our first stop, a place called Apple Shop, not the fruit, but Appalachia Shop. It was time to ask that question. Our guide at Apple Shop explained they work with various artists to promote the beauty of Appalachia, break down stereotypes, and speak out against issues that they're all facing. They did this through films, paintings, music, and more. We're connecting with people all the way in Connecticut, the guide said to me. Okay, this man had my attention. Of all the places he could have mentioned, he's referencing my home state before even meeting me? He went on to explain that Apple Shop had started their own radio station years ago, and the various hosts could play whatever music they wanted. Now, one of their Monday night shows was called Hip Hop from the Hilltop, and it gained incredible popularity among a number of federal and state prisons. So when they saw this large audience of inmates developing, a new program took shape. During the 2 hours of hip-hop, they operate a toll-free line where the families and friends of those inmates can call in to record messages and send song requests for their loved ones who are in jail.
Nice.
The following hour, they run a show called Calls from Home, where those recorded messages are broadcast to all the inmates and anyone else who's listening. An article from the Christian Science Monitor wrote about one woman who called in to say, "Hey baby, this is your wife. This is your Monday blues chaser. The girls are behaving and I'm good. I've been hard at it. I got some decent sleep this weekend. Yeah, some normal hours." All the way in the mountains of Whitesburg, Kentucky, in a place I figured was out of touch with the rest of the world, they were using technology to connect thousands of people in ways I never could have imagined. Our last stop for the night before we turned in would be dinner with a local high school teacher, 2 students, and a woman who helped residents build up their financial credit. My stomach was in knots anticipating this meeting. I wasn't ready to hear about a failing education system that had left the youth of Appalachia behind. As we approached the restaurant, I sent Melissa a text message saying, "I have a feeling this is going to hit me really hard. I'm trying to mentally prepare for it." Before meeting our guests, I knew, though, I had to leave my assumptions at the door and prepare to once again ask the question, what is it like?
To be you in this place.
Well, Luke, the high school teacher, said that kids in Appalachia are like kids anywhere else. They just don't realize the opportunities that are available to them. He's developed a pre-calculus course that challenges students to solve real-world issues. Luke said math requires students to look at a problem and find the best way to solve it. And likewise, he has them research issues in their communities and then discuss the best way to solve them and put that into action. In other words, these were not the dumb hillbillies I was watching on TV. Further challenging my preconceived ideas of education in Appalachia were Shelby and Katie, the 2 high school students. "The people here are not duds like they think," Shelby said. "Even though others doubt them, we find a way to make it." Katie spoke to me about how she's working hard to major in forensic science, even if things didn't happen as quickly as they do on CSI. And last May, who helps people become more financially stable, said Appalachia has so much beauty to share with the outside world. She had recently met 2 deaf cyclists from Connecticut, again with Connecticut, and another pair of cyclists from Norway, who let her know that their town was part of the Trans-America Bicycle Trail. "Imagine what might happen," May said, "if we embraced that and made our part of Appalachia more enticing and bike-friendly for people riding through." Her face seemed to glow as she got even more excited thinking about the natural attractions their area has, like an area further up the mountain where wild horses roam free. This was not the depressing encounter I was expecting. Instead, I heard a message of hope, of a people who held such a deep pride in their land that they wanted the rest of America to experience it like they did. And now the next night we attended a community fish fry celebrating the African American holiday of Juneteenth, when slaves learned they were set free. People from all walks of life came to this thing. They mingled with one another. My classmates and I began chatting with folks at each of the different tables. And again, I hope to explore more of my assumptions, which up to this point were being proven wrong at every single turn. I was curious though, what about things like racism and homophobia? The number of minorities wasn't too high in the area, and there were certainly conservative churches that frowned upon homosexuality. And just a week before leaving on this trip, I had seen a new music video from Taylor Swift. I'm not proud of the fact I was watching Taylor Swift, but I admit it. But in this video, she embraces the LGBT community, while hillbillies shout and wave protest signs like, "It's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve," or "Get a brain, morons," spelled incorrectly. So I sat down at a table with African American and LGBTQ activists, and I asked them, what is it like
To be you in this place.
Well, the first guest I met at the fish fry was Johnny Cummings, former mayor of a small town called Vico. Back in 2013, you might have seen Johnny on the news or even a segment on Comedy Central's Colbert Report, when Vico became the smallest town in America to pass the LGBT Fairness Ordinance. This prohibited discrimination based upon a person's actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity. Not only that, Johnny himself was openly gay. On top of being mayor, he was also the local hairdresser. When I asked him about his experience, he told me neither his own sexuality nor the ordinance seemed to be a problem for people in Vico. Yeah, I said, but surely there must have been some pushback when it came to this issue. Johnny laughed and told me, well, one person did need a little convincing. And the only thing she said was, I don't care if they're gay or straight, just promise I can kick them out if they don't pay me my rent. And that was the end of that. As for racism, both the fish fry and the worship service we attended at a local church the next morning were a beautiful blend of black and white people coming together in a place where things like race and gender and sexuality didn't seem to matter. What tied everyone together was that deep love for the land, where neighbor looked out for neighbor. So how had I been so wrong about these people? How had everything I'd been shown given me such a false impression? As I flipped through my Bible, I landed on those words we heard from the Apostle Paul. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Paul was writing this to the Roman churches and synagogues made up of Gentiles and Jews who all had their own idea of how best to live as part of this new Christian community. He urged them to cut past their assumptions they'd made about one another and allow themselves to be transformed by their shared love for Christ and the sacrifice he made for all of them. In doing so, they could discern what was the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And just as those of us in Connecticut might look at the people in Appalachia and think, they need our help. Look how much worse they have it. Paul's next words to the Romans apply to each of us. I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. When we strip away the labels and the stereotypes, we open our eyes to seeing one another in new ways. When we hear the stories and lived experiences of others, we discover new gifts and talents they have, and ways they're making their part of the world a little brighter. Paul says, we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually we're members of one another. I stopped seeing Appalachia as a place separate from where I live, and began to see it as a place filled with individuals whose lives are connected to all of ours. May, one of our dinner guests from earlier, gave us a message to bring back to our congregations. She said, Appalachia does not need saving. It needs solidarity. Those powerful words are still playing over and over in my head. So many churches focus on who in the world we need to save, when countless people who are hurting right now just need someone who will stand with them. Someone to be a listening presence. Who does our church need to be a listening presence to right now? You might remember me saying at our logo discussion not too long ago that we're proclaiming to the world that this is a place where those who feel unseen, unheard, and unwanted can find community. A community where it doesn't matter how you think, how you look, or who you love. We seek to be the type of community that Paul describes in his letter, understanding that everyone everywhere is connected and has gifts waiting to be discovered in one another. Being that community, being that church, means who we strive to be within our walls should be exactly who we strive to be outside of our walls. Look at our work with Covenant to Care and the Adopt a Social Worker program. Rather than saying there are local children in need, let's decide what's best for them. We instead partnered with a social worker who is already in touch with these children and these families to get an understanding of what their lives are like and how we can best serve them. It all starts by removing the labels and assumptions placed on people, on the people we encounter, and instead asking them,
What is it like to be you in this place?
who is out there right now waiting to be asked that very question? Amen.